which prevented food, water, and medicine from entering Gaza, resulting in thousands of Palestinians being diagnosed with malnutrition and hundreds actually starving to death. But, Mr. President, today we are not just talking about Gaza. In the West Bank, in direct violation of international law that protects Palestinian territory, Israeli soldiers and settlers since October 2023 have killed over 1,000 Palestinians, including 233 children. During that period, Mr. President, they have demolished more than 6,000 Palestinian homes and established more than 200 new illegal settlements and outposts in Palestinian territory. And let us be clear, because I think there is some confusion about this. These actions are not just the results of some extremists, out-of-control settlers who are just doing whatever they want. Those actions are consistent with Israeli government policy. Netanyahu's security cabinet has approved the most sweeping changes to the West Bank's legal status since 1967, removing nearly all constraints on settlement expansion. Netanyahu himself declared, this is Netanyahu, quote, "There will never be a Palestinian state," end quote. And I say that to some people here who still say, well, we're in favor of a two-state solution. That is not Mr. Netanyahu's position. Quote, he said, "There will never be a Palestinian state." His finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, bragged that new settlement construction in the West Bank would bury, that's his word, bury the idea of a Palestinian state. But, Mr. President, it is not just Gaza and the West Bank. We now know that Netanyahu convinced President Trump to start an unprovoked and unconstitutional war on Iran. For 40 years, Netanyahu has wanted the United States to participate with Israel in a war against Iran, and finally, after 40 years of effort, he finally found in Trump a president willing to go along. He couldn't get Democratic presidents in the past, couldn't get Republican presidents in the past. In Trump, he finally found a president willing to go along. This war in violation of international law has resulted already in the deaths of thousands of civilians, including hundreds of children in Iran and Lebanon, including 26 Israeli civilians who are now dead and 13 American soldiers who have lost their lives so far in this conflict. Mr. President, all over the world, certainly including the United States, hundreds of millions of innocent people are suffering the economic consequences of this war, with higher prices and growing scarcity of basic goods. I believe that in Vermont now, the price of gas, regular gas, is about $4 a gallon. Parts of the country, it is even higher than that. But, Mr. President, for Netanyahu, Gaza was not enough. Attacking Iran was not enough. Netanyahu is now waging a full-blown war of expansion against Lebanon. That war in Lebanon has not only killed more than 2,000 people, but has resulted in Israel occupying 14% of Lebanese territory. Let me repeat that. The war in Lebanon has not only killed more than 2,000 people, but has resulted in Israel occupying 14% of Lebanese territory. President, the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, has announced that all Lebanese border villages will be demolished. His exact words, following, quote, the model in Gaza. Demolish border villages. Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, has warned that Dayaya, a suburb of South Beirut, quote, will look like Khan Yunis, end quote, a city in Gaza that Israel reduced to rubble. In other words, what they did in Gaza is now what they intend to do in parts of Lebanon. And these, Mr. President, are not threats, they are promises. For all of the reasons that I have given, and more, and you're going to hear more from some of my colleagues in a few moments, support for Israel in this country has plummeted. Today, according to a recent Pew poll, 80% of Democrats now have an unfavorable opinion of Israel, and 41% of Republicans share that view. And the numbers in all parties among young people are even higher. Young people, whether they are young Democrats, progressives, conservatives, do not want us to continue to fund the horrific war policies of Netanyahu. A recent Quinnipiac poll also found that 60%, including 3/4 of Democrats, 2/3 of independents, and 37% of Republicans, I say that to my Republican colleagues, 37% of Republicans do not want the U.S. sending more military aid to Israel. And that is why, Mr. President, I am offering today 2 joint resolutions of disapproval, the only formal mechanism Congress has to block an arms sale. The first resolution would block the sale of $151 million in 1,000-pound bombs. The second would block $295 million in bulldozers, the machines used to demolish homes in the West Bank and Gaza, and make a Palestinian state physically impossible. Palestinian state used to demolish homes in the West Bank and Gaza, and make a Palestinian state physically impossible. Mr. President, the time is long overdue for members of the U.S. Senate to start listening to the American people and not to AIPAC. The time is now for us to end all U.S. military aid to the extremist Netanyahu government, and a yes vote is an important way forward. Mr. President, with that, I would yield to my colleague from Maryland, Senator Chris Van Hollen.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, I rise in support of the 2 resolutions offered by my colleague, Senator Sanders, that would bar the transfer of certain offensive weapons and equipment to the Netanyahu government. Specifically, these resolutions would block the transfer of 12,000 1,000-pound bombs and 132 armored bulldozers, valued at more than $446 million and funded entirely by American taxpayers. Mr. President, we cannot continue to provide a blank check to the Netanyahu government as it continues to use U.S. weapons in violation of U.S. and international law. As I've long said, Israel was justified in its war against Hamas. after the horrific U.S. and international law. As I've long said, Israel was justified in its war against Hamas after the horrific attack of October 7, 2023. But the Netanyahu government is not justified in imposing collective punishment on all the people of Gaza. As Senator Merkley and I wrote in our report after traveling to the region in August 2025, and I quote, "The Netanyahu government is implementing a plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza of Palestinians. America is complicit." And now, as Senator Sanders indicated, Israeli leaders are saying out loud they plan to apply the same plans in southern Lebanon as they implemented in Gaza. Senator Sanders mentioned threatening what they did in Khan Yunis. As recently as March 31st, Israeli Defense Minister Katz said that, and I quote, "All homes in Lebanese villages near the border will be destroyed in accordance with the Rafah and Beit Hanun model in Gaza," unquote. Well, colleagues, I visited Gaza. I visited the Gaza crossing, the Rafah crossing twice, along with my colleague, Senator Merkley. First in January 2024, when Rafah's population had quadrupled from pre-war levels to more than 1 million people who'd been displaced within Gaza, from northern Gaza. And then we traveled to the Rafah crossing in August 2025, after the IDF's offensive against Rafah, one that the Biden administration claimed that they tried to stop. And on that visit, Senator Merkley and I climbed a rooftop, and you could look into Rafah, obliterated, reduced to absolute rubble. And as we were told by former IDF soldiers, eyewitnesses who had the courage to speak with us. Israel has systematically dismantled essential infrastructure and wrought near total destruction of the civilian sites throughout Gaza, including through the use of these bulldozers and 100,000-pound bombs. And now the Israeli Minister of Defense says they're going to do the same thing in southern Lebanon. And indeed, since the war in Lebanon restarted, Israeli forces have killed over 2,000 people, including 250 people in 10 minutes the day after the ceasefire was announced. Entire villages have been destroyed and over 1.1 million people displaced. Now, let's not forget how we got in to this most recent round of destruction in the region. President Trump is fully responsible for getting America into this war, period. But we know from Trump administration officials and public reporting how Prime Minister Netanyahu, for his own reasons, was pushing Trump to attack Iran. Indeed, he said it himself. On April 11th, Netanyahu boasted to the Israeli public that Israel was, quote, first to act because we knew what was at stake. But if I had told you a year ago that our pilots, men and women, would fly in Iran, who would have believed it? Said Prime Minister Netanyahu. Went on to say, if I had told you a year ago that the United States of America, the strongest power in the world, would fight by our side, shoulder to shoulder, wing to wing for nearly 40 days against the common enemy, who would have believed it? And then Prime Minister Netanyahu went on to say, all this happened because we initiated, we acted, we attacked, unquote. Now, those of us who have been around here a little while know that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been pushing for a war with Iran for a very long time. In fact, he recently publicly acknowledged that the current U.S.-Israel war on Iran, quote, allows us to do what I've been hoping to do for 40 years. That's what Prime Minister Netanyahu said. I remember when Prime Minister Netanyahu actually spoke before a joint session of Congress asking us not to support the JCPOA, which of course prevented Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Of course, the current president then tore that up when he first came into office. So Prime Minister Netanyahu has been trying to get previous presidents to join him in attacking Iran, but no previous president was stupid enough or reckless enough to actually do it. And so here we are. Without facing any imminent threat, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu started an illegal war against Iran. And it is a gross violation of international law. Indeed, on April 2nd, a group of over 100 international law experts, people who actually believe in international law, included former U.S. and UN officials, published an open letter stating, quote, the initiation of the campaign was a clear violation of the United Nations Charter, and that the conduct of the United States and Israeli forces in the war, quote, raises serious concerns about violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law, including potential war crimes. That's on top of the illegality of initiating a war against Iran. Now look, earlier this afternoon, nearly all Democrats voted together to end Donald Trump's illegal war against Iran. Many of us have vowed that we will not support one taxpayer dollar to continue this war that's making us less safe and less well off. Well, that commitment and determination should apply to the Trump administration and to the Netanyahu administration. We need to rein in Trump in this illegal war, and we need to rein in the Netanyahu administration in this illegal war. Now, colleagues, I want to focus for a moment on the portion of the Sanders resolution that bans the transfer of bulldozers to the IDF. These are the bulldozers that helped raise Rafah in Gaza to the ground. And for those who don't remember, I asked them to recall the case of Rachel Corrie, a 23-year-old American peace activist who was killed by an Israeli bulldozer trying to block the razing of buildings in Rafah over 20 years ago. Rachel Corrie has never gotten any justice, and her family will tell you that today. In fact, just since January of 2022, at least 9 more American citizens have been killed by extremist Israeli settlers or security forces in the West Bank. And not one of them, not one Israeli has never gotten any justice. And her family will tell you that today. In fact, just since January of 2022, at least 9 more American citizens have been killed by extremist Israeli settlers or security forces in the West Bank. And not one of them, not one, has gotten justice. Just like Rachel Corrie, no accountability today. In fact, just since January of 2022, at least 9 more American citizens have been killed. Since January of 2022, at least 9 more American citizens have been killed by extremist Israeli settlers or security forces in the West Bank. And not one of them, not one, has gotten justice. just like Rachel Corrie, no accountability. Now, Mr. President, there's no piece of equipment that has helped Israel and the Netanyahu government destroy civilian infrastructure in the West Bank and Gaza and now Lebanon more than the bulldozer. Just look at the titles of some of the reporting coming from what's happening about southern Lebanon. Guardian title, everything's gone. Israel destroys entire villages. And you can see it for yourself. I really encourage my colleagues just to look at the videos. Some of them have been shared by members of the Israeli military themselves that showed controlled detonations and destruction of entire villages. And this isn't new. During the last war in Lebanon, Amnesty International documented how the Israeli military carried out extensive and deliberate destruction of civilian property across almost the entire Lebanese border with Israel, including 10,000 structures, primarily through the use of manually laid explosives and bulldozers. And in the West Bank, as we speak, we're seeing violent Israeli settlers kill Palestinian citizens with impunity. And we're also seeing the use of these bulldozers to demolish Palestinian homes in the West Bank and other civilian infrastructures. Again, you can see it for yourselves in the videos. This is all part of a slow-motion ethnic cleansing effort in the West Bank and de facto annexation of the West Bank. Indeed, the New York Times in September 2024 spoke about raids in the West Bank villages of Tulkrum and Jenin. The headline was this, quote, "Israeli bulldozers flatten mile after mile in the West Bank," end quote. In total, since the Gaza war started, Israeli authorities have demolished at least 4,900 structures in the West Bank and displaced 9,000 Palestinians there. And as this has gone on, so has settler violence, often with the complicity of the IDF in the West Bank. Over 1,000 Palestinians, including 230 children, have been killed with virtual impunity since October 2023. And with impunity, the Israeli human rights organization Yesh Din said that between 2005 and December 2025, that's a 20-year period, more than 93% of police investigations into settler violence in the West Bank concluded without an indictment. So what are we going to do about this, Mr. President? We need to stop providing the Netanyahu government with an absolute blank check. We need to demand accountability for American citizens who have been killed there. And so I urge my colleagues now to support this resolution. If we want to rein in a Trump administration that launched an illegal war against Iran, we should also rein in the Netanyahu administration. It's doing exactly the same thing with American taxpayer dollars. I yield the floor.
I thank the
Senator from Vermont.
I thank the senator from Maryland and yield to the senator from Oregon, Mr. Merkley.
Mr. President,
I recognize the senator from Oregon.
on February 28th, in coordination with and at the urging of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Trump attacked Iran without congressional authorization. That is, without the authority required under our Constitution. And almost immediately, Hezbollah, Iran's proxy, engaged in a battle with Israel. And now we have Israel invading southern Lebanon. And the Netanyahu government is exercising the same strategy they pursued in Gaza. drop massive bombs, level entire towns, block routes for civilians to leave, and block access for humanitarian relief. And the United States, we're partners in this. We're complicit in this. Not just because we partnered with Israel to ignite the war with Iran, but because we sold the bombs and the bulldozers that Israel is using. We didn't stop supplying the Netanyahu government with weapons years ago, even when it became clear that they were deliberately targeting homes, schools, and hospitals. When they were blocking deliveries of humanitarian aid, including water, food, and medicine. When the result was mass malnutrition, particularly among mothers and children and the elderly. We must not continue to be complicit in these tragedies by selling these tools of destruction, the bombs and the bulldozer, to Israel. The administration says, let's sell them 12,000 more 1,000-pound bombs. Picture 12,000 1,000-pound bombs dropping on neighborhoods. That's what we're enabling. Or a vast number of bulldozers to destroy homes and buildings. We've seen it in the West Bank. Homes and villages bulldozed. Ancient olive groves bulldozed. And now we're seeing it in Lebanon. With the Netanyahu government bragging about doing the same thing to Lebanon they did to Gaza, make it uninhabitable. Let's be clear, bulldozers are not defensive weapons. Recent satellite images of southern Lebanon show the Netanyahu government flattening towns, destroying bridges, cutting off civilian movement, cutting off humanitarian access, in a replay of the destruction we saw in Gaza. Not to mention, the Netanyahu government has supported settlers in their expansion, massive expansion of outposts and settlements on Palestinian land in the West Bank, in their mass increase in construction of homes and villages, and most disturbing of all, supporting the settlers in their violent attacks on Palestinian communities. All of this in the goal of creating a greater Israel by destroying any prospect of a Palestinian state. And let's not forget, as my colleague from Maryland mentioned, it was a bulldozer operated by the Israeli Defense Forces that killed American citizen Rachel Corrie in Rafah in 2003, the first of 14 American citizens who have been killed by Israeli soldiers since then. Approving this sale of the bombs and bulldozers deepens our responsibility for these tragedies and for the suffering. Colleagues, when we became senators, we swore an oath to take on the responsibilities designated to Congress in the Constitution, including the question of war. As Madison summarized, the Constitution supposes what the history of all governments demonstrates, that the executive is the branch of power most interested in war, most prone to it. Thus, the Constitution has accordingly, with studied care, vested the question of war in the legislature. That's the Constitution we swore an oath to. And it's the Constitution that President Trump violated by launching a war without congressional authorization. In 1973, during the Vietnam War, Congress approved the War Powers Act in the words, quote, fulfill the intent of the framers of the Constitution to rein in the president from waging wars without congressional approval. The War Powers Act does allow the president to respond to an imminent threat that is, and I quote, a national emergency created by an attack upon the United States, its territories, possessions, or armed forces. But in this case, no such condition existed, and thus the violation of the Constitution. Yet earlier today, my colleagues across the aisle voted to allow the president to continue to violate the law and violate the Constitution. When will we say enough is enough?
Senator's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask 1 minute to close. Unanimous consent for 1 minute to close.
Without objection.
Thank you. Let us today, all 100 senators, uphold our oath to the Constitution. The indiscriminate use of American bombs in Iran and Lebanon and Gaza to target civilians and infrastructure by Israel must end. We should not sell these bulldozers and these bombs to Israel. I urge my colleagues to vote for these two joint resolutions of disapproval. Thank you.
Recognize the senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise tonight in support of Senator Sanders' joint resolutions of disapproval for select arms sales to Israel. The Senate has voted on similar resolutions in the past, all of which I have supported. The last time this chamber voted on prior resolutions, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's government was bombarding Gaza. A ceasefire had collapsed. Hostage release negotiations had stalled, and innocent children and families in Gaza were starving and suffering. And that was because the Netanyahu government, fueled by extremist Israeli National Security Minister Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Smotrich, and supported by the Trump administration, was blocking humanitarian aid from reaching Palestinians in Gaza. The large-scale bombs covered by those resolutions went far beyond what Israel needed for its defense. Their use would cause indiscriminate damage and only worsen the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. Now, the need for restrictions on military aid to Netanyahu has only taken on renewed urgency. The Trump administration is proposing to sell to Netanyahu 1,000-pound bombs and armored bulldozers that Netanyahu could use not only in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon, but also in Trump's illegal and unnecessary war in Iran. I fully support the current ceasefire with Iran, but tenuous as it may be, Vice President J.D. Vance's bid for a peace deal in Pakistan last weekend failed, and fighting could resume at any time. So make no mistake, a vote to approve arms sales to Israel at this time would be seen as a message of approval for Trump and Netanyahu's disastrous war against Iran. I will not send that message. Trump's war of choice in Iran is a moral tragedy and economic disaster playing out before our eyes. It is only making the United States, Israel, and the world less safe. Let us count the ways. 1, we have seen thousands of civilian deaths in Iran and Lebanon. More than 100 Iranian schoolgirls have been killed by American weapons, and 13 American service members have been killed and hundreds injured. 2, the United States and the Netanyahu government are losing credibility, in particular President Trump's threats of war crimes and genocide against Iran are a total abdication of moral leadership on the global stage and must be opposed here and everywhere. 3, the United States and Iran are blockading the Strait of Hormuz, crippling the global economy and sending energy prices sky high. 4, gas prices in America are $1.20 a gallon higher than before the war. Vehicle owners will be paying $500 to $600 more here in the United States over the course of this next year. It is going to be Trump at the pump. The American people are going to be paying for this war. And 5, this dangerous, unnecessary, and expensive war has cost the American taxpayer about $50 billion so far, with the Trump administration seeking hundreds of billions of dollars more as part of a $1.5 trillion military budget, which must be rejected. And 6, Iran still controls its uranium. And 7, there has been no regime change. We just swapped out one Ayatollah for another. And 8 Iranians are still not free. Why would we send American military weapons that could prolong, escalate, or worsen this horrible situation in the Middle East? I say no more. The Senate should express its opposition to Trump and Netanyahu's needless war and seek to stop it. Number 1, we should pass these resolutions to block 1,000-pound bombs and armored bulldozers for use in this war. 2, we should pass a war powers resolution that denies President Trump the authority to continue this war. And 3, we should reject any request for funding to pay for Trump's war of choice. Today, we must send a clear message that the United States Senate opposes in the strongest possible terms Trump and Netanyahu's dangerous, expensive, unnecessary, and immoral war. There is no military solution to this crisis. We must solve this at the negotiating table. We must end this war now. We must pass these resolutions in order to have the United States Senate speak to our outrage at what is happening in the name of the American people. Mr. President, with that, I yield.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I rise in support of Senator Sanders' resolutions. I'll be voting for both of them. On February 21, 2024, I wrote a public letter to President Biden and I said the Hamas attack on Israel is devastating, and Israel faces threats from other adversaries in the region, and we should help Israel defend its civilians, but we should do so only by providing defensive weapons to Israel and not offensive weapons. Why defensive weapons? We've long been a security partner of Israel, and those who follow the relationship understand there are threats to Israeli civilians that are very present because of actors in the region like Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and Iran and Iranian-backed militias. Israeli civilians do face threats that warrant the U.S.
探索に挑戦。冒険者の生活はどうやら性に合っているようだ。
providing defensive support. But I took the public position more than 2 years ago now that it would be wrong to send offensive weapons to Israel.
「昆虫は本能的に光を追うが、人間も同じだ。希望という名の光を追っている。」神というのは天上の存在だが、たまには地上を歩き回るべきだな。
And that position was based on exactly the same reason: protect civilians, protect Palestinian civilians, protect Lebanese civilians, protect civilians. And offensive weapons delivered to Israel and the way they are using them, particularly bombs, are guaranteed to cause mass civilian suffering. That's what's happened in Gaza. That's what is happening in Lebanon. And anyone who's paid attention to this region just has to answer this question: is more civilian death going to get us to the right place? This is a region that has been replete with the deaths of civilians, and the U.S. taxpayer and this body should not be pouring gasoline or adding tinder to a fire where more and more civilians are in jeopardy. And so since that public letter to President Biden, I have supported Senator Sanders and other resolutions before. If weapons are offensive in nature, the U.S. shouldn't be transferring them. And I will support the resolutions for that matter. We need to protect civilians. We don't need to pour gasoline on a fire in a region and accelerate more deaths of civilians. I have received some outreach about this particular vote from some who say this is a vote to deny all military aid to Israel. That is not what this vote is about. This is about denying particular weapons that are offensive in nature. Just to give you an order of magnitude,
神というのは天上の存在だが、たまには地上を歩き回るべきだな。昆虫は本能的に光を追うが、人間も同じだ。希望という名の光を追っている。
During this term of Congress, the President has noticed 27 different arms transfers to Israel. And with these two joint resolutions of disapproval, we have challenged six of those 27 arms transfers as being offensive in nature. We have not challenged 21 of the arms transfers that are primarily defensive in nature. There has been not a single senator who has brought up a challenge to the defensive arms sales because we want to protect civilian lives. But when weapons like this that are offensive in nature are guaranteed to lead to the deaths of civilians, I think it's appropriate to challenge them, and that's why I am going to support these resolutions. I've also had some to say that if these resolutions succeed, the United States is reducing its support for Israeli defense. That is also not true. The support for the Israeli defense is a result of a 10-year memorandum of understanding that has an annual allocation for Israeli defense that has been supplemented by a supplemental bill that was passed by this body in April of 2024. That amount of money, which is an annual allocation, gets drawn down by these transfers. I would urge my colleagues to support the cessation of offensive weapons transfers. if this bill succeeds, it doesn't reduce support for Israeli defense by a single penny. It just means that Israel should request and the U.S. should consider transferring defensive weapons to enable Israel to defend its own civilians, but not carry out military action that would harm others. Civilians. The principle of let's just stop the damage to civilians in the region seems to me to be overwhelming. If the death of civilians was accomplishing anything, we would have seen that accomplishment long before now. And so stopping the transfer of offensive weapons seems to me to be the right thing to do, not just for the U.S. security interest and the safety of our service members in the region, but it's also the right thing to do to promote regional stability and the security of Israel. And for that reason, I'll vote for the resolutions, and I appreciate my colleague introducing them.
The senator from Vermont.
Let me thank Senator Van Hollen and Senator Merkley and Senator Markey and Senator Kaine, and before that, Senator Kelly for their remarks. The American people increasingly are sick and tired of spending billions of dollars in support of illegal, horrific military actions on the part of the Netanyahu government. We have spent tens of billions of dollars already. Gaza has been destroyed, 10% of the population dead or wounded. Netanyahu got Trump into a war in Iran. Thousands of civilians are now dead, including many children. And now Netanyahu is at war in Lebanon. Thousands of civilians dead, civilian neighborhoods bombed, 1 million people displaced from their homes, and 14% of Lebanese territory occupied by Israel. What the American people are saying is enough, enough. And by the way, this is bipartisan. It's not just Democrats, not just independents. It is a significant number of Republicans who remember President Trump talking about America first, talking about the needs to invest in this country not in bombs and bulldozers to destroy people in the Middle East. So with that, Mr. President, I would hope that we would have a very strong vote in support of these resolutions to tell Netanyahu, to tell the world that enough is enough. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
To discharge Senate military
Consideration of